Hello, in this video I'll be showing you how you can make a trench knife from the Fallout games. This was made mostly of EVA foam and painted using standard acrylic paints. You can find a free template for this in the video description below. While you're down there you may as well hit subscribe, click on the little notification bell and give this video a thumbs up if you want to see more props like this in the future. So let's get started. So this template can be found in the description of this video, just cutting off that little piece there that's a basic outline of the spikes. We won't need that till later. So just using a pair of scissors to cut out the basic shape of the knife. And now using a very sharp knife just to cut out the smaller details. Once you've got the template cut out, pin it to a piece of 10mm foam with some pins to keep it in place. And then I draw around my templates at the back of a knife. If you use a Sharpie, you'll find that the Sharpie line will bleed through your paint later on. So using a really sharp knife to cut this out now so you get a nice clean cut and a nice tidy edge. I'm not going to cut out those small details though, I'm just going to cut out the outline of the knife. Need to cut out two of these, one of them with the template flipped over, so you've got a mirror image of the original one. And we're going to want to stick these together, just make sure they line up first. But before we stick them, we're going to want to get rid of the textured side. So the way I'll get rid of the textured side on these floor mats is to use a really sharp knife and to go around the edge on the piece you want the texture off of. And I'm going about a third of the way in from the textured side with this, and I go around the edge twice to cut as far in as I can get. And then once I've gone around the edge, I'll lay this piece nice and flat and then use that cut all around the edge as a guide for my blade and run that down the entire length of the piece. And then you'll be left with two pieces and you just discard the piece with the texture on it. Lots of hot glue, making sure you get right up to the edge, and then just press those together, making sure that they're nice and lined up. Just trimming the edge off there to make sure it's nice and flat. Now I'm going to need a sharp edge on the cutting side of the knife. So using my really sharp knife, holding the foam up against the edge of a table so I can get the correct angle, I'm just going to cut along this to give it a nice bevel. I do this on both sides of the underside of the blade only. And that bevel is going to be quite jagged. So I'm using some really coarse sandpaper just to smooth that out a bit. So now that's got a beveled edge to it, it looks a lot more like a knife. So I'm now using a really sharp knife to now cut in those details. The reason I didn't cut them in beforehand is because the two sides of the knife might not have lined up properly. Then going into those little details with some small needle files just to smooth them off. And then using a heat gun to go over all those bits I've sanded, as they're going to be quite rough and furry, just to flatten those down, and then using a metal ruler just to smooth it out. So I've cut out some strips from 2mm craft foam here. I've cut out 6 15mm wide pieces and they're going to make up the grip on the handle. I've also cut out a 1cm strip that will go at the top end of the handle and a 6mm wide strip that will go around the bottom of the handle. So I'm going to glue on first of all the top handle section, Glue a little piece on, wrap it round, cut it to the right length. And then apply hot glue to that. Now you know it's the right length to secure that in place. After you've done the top piece, stick on the 6mm piece to the very bottom of the handle next, and then you've got a gap in the middle where the other 5 15mm pieces need to go. Now you can't just go sticking them on one after the other because you might space them wrong. So what I've done is I've taken some pins and I pin those into place. And that way if you get them wrong you can move them about a bit before you go ahead and permanently glue them. So once you're happy with the positioning and the spacing, making sure they're all evenly spaced, you just unpin one and glue them the same way as you did the first one. The trim right on the end of the knife and right at the top end of the handle is 2 layers thick. Once you've stuck all these details on, you've essentially got yourself a finished foam knife. But for this particular design it requires a spiked knuckle duster portion around the handle. So for this I'm going to cut out 3 more 15mm wide strips and then cut off the same length in aluminium armature wire, and this is 2mm thick, which is the same thickness as my craft foam. So once I've cut this off, I'm trying to get that as straight as I can, and then apply some hot glue down the centre of one of those strips of foam and stick the wire in it, leaving a couple of centimetres sticking out of one end. Once that's positioned in the centre, add some hot glue to one side of that and stick on the other strip. It won't line up, it will overlap, which is the point. And then more glue on the other side and stick on the other strip. Again, it will be overlapping the bit at the bottom, but that's the idea. Now hot glue all over the top surface of that, making sure that you come out at least a centimetre from the wire on both sides, and then push that down onto another piece of craft foam. Once that glue's set, use a really sharp knife and cut down the 15mm piece that was the bottom piece that we initially stuck that metal wire to. Once you've done this on both sides, what you'll be left with is a 15mm wide piece of foam that's 3 layers thick with a metal wire running through it, which means you can bend this into shape and it will stay in that shape, which is perfect for making a fake knuckle duster out of. So I'm just cutting a piece of foam off the end here to expose the wire. That way I can dig this into the handle to keep it attached. I've cut it so it goes about 2/3 of the way in. Now to get that into the handle, I'm using my heat gun to heat up a small screwdriver about the same diameter as the wire. That way I can then just push this into the foam and it will burn the foam and soften the glue between the 2 layers. There's no real simple way of doing this next bit, you just need to bend it and twist it until it's the shape you want. and that would depend on how big your hands are. And then you need to just cut off any excess and expose a bit of wire, so you can do the same thing again and just stick that wire into the handle of the knife to keep that knuckle duster handle thing nice and secure. Once it's the shape you want it, a little bit of glue underneath both ends just to keep that in nice and securely. Now I'm putting glue on the very bottom of the handle, and I'm then going to push that down onto a piece of craft foam just to make the end look a lot neater. Holding this down on a flat surface just to keep it nice and straight, and then cutting off any excess with my knife. It's time to make the spikes for the knuckle duster portion, so I'm cutting a 3 cm wide piece of foam. And of course we don't want the textured side, so just as before I'm going to cut that texture off by going around the edges with a sharp knife and then running that knife along those cuts just to cut a strip off of that. Cutting off as little as you can so you're left with a nice thick piece of foam. And then we need these spikes to be cut into about 1 cm wide pieces, so they'll be 3 cm by 1 cm, and then 1 cm up from one end you need to cut like a little detail line into these. So just cut a shallow little V shape into it and pull out the little piece. Will give you a nice detail line all the way around those. The spike section is cut into the longer side, the 2 cm side. And then you've got that little template thing to check that they're all going to be about the right size. Now for these to fit onto the knuckle duster portion, you're going to need to cut a little curve into the back of these, and then the 5th one that goes on the bottom of the handle needs to stay flat. So a little bit of hot glue and just push those into place. And you're going to want them angled slightly outwards on the knuckle duster part. Just picking off any glue that's seeped out while it's still soft. And we have a finished foam knife. So now it's time to paint it. I'm just using standard acrylic paints. This is a silver paint. I'm using a very soft bristled brush here to minimise brush strokes. So this knife is fully metallic other than the handle. You could of course mask off the handle and spray it. That'd give you a neater paint job, but as this is supposed to be worn and bloody, it doesn't really matter. I find putting on the paint rather thin and then drying it with a heat gun between coats is a lot quicker than doing a thick coat of paint and leaving it ages to dry. I ended up doing 2 coats of silver. Now painting the handle, I did this in 2 coats of a dark brown called raw umber. I then dried these with a heat gun, and then using a dry brushing method I went over this again in a kind of a wood grain effect with a lighter brown called burnt umber. Just make sure if you're trying to simulate wood grain that you only run the brush strokes one way. I then also applied this to the metal parts as well to simulate rust. I'm just using an old brush here that I've used many times before for weathering, and I'm just applying various dark colours, dark browns and black to the entire knife, blade, handle, every little bit, just to really dirty it up a bit. Making sure I get those bristles into all of the recessed areas especially. Now to add some blood, now that's all dry and I've got a really bright red here. This is cadmium red deep hue, which is much too bright for blood, but I found if you mix this with a little bit of violet paint, then it makes the perfect blood colour. It's always best to mix a little and gradually darken it, because if you get it too dark it's going to take tons of the bright stuff to bring it back again in your waste paint. So I'm gradually adding in a little bit more violet until that's the colour I want it. I haven't fully mixed it. I've left it with little bits of dark here and there, a little bit of light here and there. And I'm using that same brush again. I haven't cleaned it. And there's very little paint on it, very little paint. And I'm deliberately blobbing it on there quite thick and keeping it thick rather than pressing it down to give that blood some texture. And it'll be textured and have various shades to it, and it'll end up looking really gruesome and really cool. Applying that mostly to the blade, also to the spikes, and a little bit here and there on the little bit of metal trim above and below the handle as well, that'll probably splatter off as you're stabbing somebody. Just put the blood where you think it would go if you was using this for real. Using the heat gun to dry that off, and as I've painted both sides of this, I can't just put it down on something flat, so I use my paint tubes here in a rather ingenious way underneath the handle, and then put a weight on top of the handle so the bit with the blood on it isn't touching anything. So now that's all painted, just going to seal the paint with some clear automotive lacquer. And here it is all finished. Now that lacquer I put on it at the end there was just to protect the paint, and also gives it a bit of a nice sheen and makes it feel a lot nicer as well. The blade is still really flexible, so you can't stab anybody with it, so it's totally Comic-Con safe. However, do not take this out in public and start waving around, because from here to the camera now, a few feet away, you can tell this is a really thick fake blade. But from about 20 feet away, you start waving this around in public, someone's going to think you've been on some sort of murderous rampage and might call the police, and they could turn up and shoot you dead. And that wouldn't be very good, would it? So if you're going to make one of these and take it to an event, make sure you keep it in a bag or something until you get there, then take it out for photos and things to avoid any of that. So yeah, nice quick build using mostly scraps and things I had laying around. And this was really fun. I'm going to start making some more small little weapons and things, because it is a bit of a change from the long haul of making a really big costume, and it spices things up a bit on the channel, I suppose. If you've got any requests on any future weapons you want me to make, then drop them in the comments below. And that's it for this video, I suppose. So be sure to check out the social media links in the description of this video. And remember, you don't have to be great at making to make something great. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.